Good morning. Look who's there.
Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning, Dr. David Rosensweet. Happy, happy, ho, ho, ho. It's good to see you.
And a happy ho 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 to you as well, Carolyn.
Yes, I am the ho, ho, ho of the apartment building running around like a little elf. We are here. Welcome to all the new women who have come up because we have a lot. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to you, of course. And thank you so much for being here. We have questions. We'll get started. And fingers crossed, right? Okie dokie. So, question number one comes in. Dr. Rosensweet, if we do not have access to your oils yet, and we are not absorbing properly topically, can you explain the downside of using injections or oral estrogen? I've heard and read that oral estrogen puts one at risk for clotting, but I'm not finding any information about this with a bioidentical estrogen, or progesterone. Only the synthetics are mentioned, and I'm not understanding how, by the studies, oral estradiol can benefit cardiac health, yet cause clots and strokes at the same time. Are orals and injectables really all that bad?
There's a question.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
a good one for you.
Um, I like it. There's a lot of things in there. I
She's
it
done her homework.
the first, yeah, the first thing that I think about is all of these questions are so prevalent. These and 100 more in so many women because unlike other fields in even traditional medicine, there is not a specialization going on out there. So you don't have a standard of care. You don't have a reliable backbone. Oh, when you have an appendicitis, for example, and the white count is this high and the fever is this high and the pain is this humongous, you do surgery. When it's not that high and the white count's not that high, you wait a little while. There's standard of care in every branch of medicine, but there's not in treating women in menopause. And
Right.
there's reasons for that. And the reasons have to do with the whole subject got this humongous body blow in 2000, early 2000s, when there was a false reporting of a study that scared women and providers that there was increased risk. So the whole area of treating women in menopause has not been developed. And that wasn't true for me. I started 25 years ago. I specialized in it and I kept developing it. And there's not a lot of folks out there that have decided that I want to learn about hormones. These are the most powerful biochemicals in our body. I want to get really good at it. And there are people who are getting varying levels of education and have varying levels of expertise. But I want to take it back to the real job of this particular questioner. Your real job is get ready for the long haul. You got 10, 20, 30, 40 years that you're going to want to be on hormones. You're going to want to have an excellent program. The field is rapidly developing. The menopause method is about to change over to treating both men and women. And we're actually coming up with a new name because we didn't want men receiving our bottles that say the menopause method.
For
So
women only.
we have a new name, Bright, and we've got a major team in action. And one of our goals is to have at least 3 providers in every state in the United States. So it's around the corner. Behind the scenes, we have a tremendous amount of action going on to seek out and train up these providers. Because I decided to specialize in treating women in menopause, you just learn a tremendous amount over the course of many years. Anyone who would choose to specialize in treating women in menopause would come to the same conclusions. There isn't a lot of variation. But the questions that are arising now, I'd like to address them. You could almost say, without exception, that even the least specific, most questionable of the hormones available to women in menopause, the originals, the original hormones that were available. Well, I'm not going to go back 1,000 years to when the Chinese had young women and young men pee and evaporate their urine and feed the powder to the aristocracy. That's 1,000 years ago. But a version of that was done, oh God, in the 50s, I think. I don't know exactly when it began, where they collected horse urine and dried it out and put it into pills. And they collected the urine of pregnant mares because the hormone levels were super high in pregnancy, and they called that pregnant Premarin, from pregnant mare urine, and it had estrogens in there. Horses don't have the same profile of estrogens that women have. 50% of what's in horse urine, as far as estrogens go, no human female has ever seen. But at the same time, women who were treated with Premarin were at less risk for getting breast cancer, for example, than women who were untreated. And these women, there's many women out there, as in there used to be around 18 million American women were being treated up till the Women's Health Initiative study, that benefited greatly by horse urine derived estrogen, Premarin. And then the industry came out with a second product called Prempro. They combined Premarin with a artificial synthesized progestin. You can't even call it progesterone because it isn't progesterone. It's a funky molecule. And in my opinion, we have an expert in our coalition, Phyllis Brunson, who's written extensively about how these progestins are not okay for women. And that's the product that scared everybody. But the study was so falsely reported. There was no statistically increased risk with Prempro. You even said so in the study. But people missed that part and just scared women all over the world and providers. And when they followed up on the women who even had Prempro, who did not have a statistically increased risk, they saw that there wasn't an increased risk. And in 2017, the same study committee came out with a statement saying, after 18 years of follow-up, there is no increased risk of breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke for women who are treated with Premarin or Prempro. My point is that even with these initial ventures into providing hormones, making hormones available to women, Premarin and Prempro, these women benefited enormously. And if you talk to any of these women who took Premarin and Prempro, a lot of them, and I have, they're very grateful for it. They felt good. Now, I had women who came to me who were on Premarin and Prempro. They wanted to switch to the bioidenticals, hoping there was something better. And there is, because this whole field has been developing. In the early 80s, two gentlemen, a medical doctor named Jonathan Wright and a pharmacist, Jim Hernser, they both thought, hey, we have pure ovarian bioidentical, molecular identical hormones. Why don't we just put them up in creams and gels and give them to women? And Jim Hernser did it. Bless your heart, Jim Hernser. Happy New Year. And Jonathan Wright,
Yeah.
bless your heart.
Legends.
Yeah, they both proposed it in the early 80s. You got women being treated with a molecularly identical estrogen profile that what the human ovary puts out. Well, that's great. And a lot of women started switching over to these things, but no significant percentage. And then The point that was one of the questions in there was oral estrogen could be problematic. Yes, the answer is yes, it can be. It's not common. There's reasons why it's problematic. We knew this when the birth control pills came out. They actually had a relatively bioidentical estrogen in there. They had estradiol combined with something, and they had a progestin in the birth control pills. And we knew that an uncommon but definite possible complication of the birth control pill in young women was some of these women developed thrombophlebitis, clots in their lower extremities. And some of those women had those clots break loose and go to their lungs. Pulmonary embolus. That's life-threatening. These were rare complications, but as Dr. Wright has written in a very exquisite article, it's a known complication that when you give estrogen orally, you have to give larger doses because one of the things, if you swallow estrogen or any fat soluble steroid hormone, it first goes to the liver. It's called first pass to the liver, and the majority of it, maybe 80-90% of it, is metabolized. So you have to use much higher doses of oral estrogen to get the same amount into the body that you would topically or transdermally. It's that first pass through the liver that's problematic because the liver can convert some of that estrogen into products that promote excessive coagulability. That's how it happens.
Got it.
That first pass through the liver can also result in some products that promote inflammation. Oh my, increased coagulability? Increased propensity to clot? Yes. So we have a patient right now in the menopause method. When she went on the birth control pill in her 40s, she had a stroke. She developed one of those clots. That clot broke loose. Now, this was I almost wish I didn't mention it because she had a very, very, very unusual situation. The general biology is that goes right to the lungs. But she had a hole in her heart in the chambers, and that allowed it to slip through that chamber and go to her brain. So, but I just want to tell you these things, they're not just stories in the medical literature. You can enhance coagulability by oral estrogen. It's uncommon to get those clots. That's why there's so many women out there who benefited greatly by oral estrogen in the form of Premarin and Prempro or in the form of oral estradiol. But what's the objective here? It's to develop methods of treating women where the effectiveness is maximal and the safety is maximal. The safety is maximal. The
Yeah.
safety is maximal. Uh-oh, broken record effect here. The safety is maximal. Well, we know so much more than we did back in the 1950s. And we know that topical estrogens and progesterone do not cause those metabolic byproducts that increase coagulation and increase inflammation, or thus it's reported in the medical literature. However, having done this for 25 years, wouldn't you know, I had two patients, Nancy and Denise, in the 1990s. I remember them well. They started taking hormones, and each of them, they didn't know each other. They reported to me, gee, my leg is uncomfortable, just like when I was in my 20s and I developed a clot and developed thrombophlebitis.
Ooh.
So we stopped the hormones and the discomfort went away. And we were able to resume them and get the dosages right. So both of them were able to be on compounded bioidentical hormones. But you never say never in medicine. You don't draw any 100% conclusions. So even though the medical literature says oral estrogen will not, topical estrogen will not cause increased coagulability, increased propensity to clot, or increased inflammation, you never say never. And because we're so complex biochemically that there's someone who could drink from just a little. So I just want to say that, but in the world of treating women in menopause, duh, treat women with topical estrogen. Because the likelihood of someone developing thrombophlebitis, and I can tell you, knock on wood, those are the only two cases where, I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of patients that we've had any squeak of thrombophlebitis. And even then, we were able to get these women back on hormones by careful titration of dosages. So, yes, you're a woman, questioner. You want to choose the optimal way to receive the ovarian hormones. I can cut to the chase and tell you that's compounded bioidentical hormones, molecularly identical to what your ovary used to produce. And you want to apply the estrogens for certain and testosterone for different reasons to your skin or mucous membranes. That's what you want to know. Oh, but it takes you back to the same challenge. This is your job. You don't have to know these details, but you do have to know something. And here's what you need to know. You need to go shopping until you find someone who knows the details. There's many states that the menopause method now to become bright here very soon. We have providers that have taken our training program, and we even have providers in some states that are in our mentoring program. So they've taken the training and they're discussing every case with me as part of the, and we hope within 2022 we're going to have somebody in every state. So hang in there and keep looking for bright providers, because these people, to one extent or another, they've at least been exposed to our training program. We talk about these issues. Now, if I remember somewhere in the back of my mind, Carolyn, that there was other questions embedded in there. What
Well,
what was the other question embedded in there?
she's not understanding exactly how the studies are showing that oral estradiol can benefit cardiac health, yet cause clots and strokes at the
Yes,
same
okay,
time.
thank you. Precisely. When you look at the incidence of heart attack in young men versus young women, it's been known forever that the incidence of heart attack is much higher in young men than in young women. And like for example, I my whole career I've never heard of a young woman dying of a heart attack, a woman in her 30s or 40s. They probably exist, but I haven't heard them in my exposure. But you do every so often. You hear about he was 42 and he keeled over on the tennis court and passed away. Never had a clue in his life that he had any problems. To make a long story short, this the incidence of heart attack in young women in your 30s and 40s and of course 20s and even 50s is significantly less than that of young men. So if this is the incidence of heart attack in young men, the incidence of heart attack in young women is lower. However, as time goes on and people get older, by the age of 60, the incidence equalizes. 60-year-old women have the same incidence of heart attack and stroke than that 60-year-old men do. What's the difference, folks? It's called estrogen. There's some young men that get heart attacks because they don't have enough estrogen. We know that when we test a few of these men that are super low in estrogen, what? Men have estrogen? Yeah, not much. But there's some young men who are super low in estrogen. They have their risk of coronary artery disease is much higher. Now, this is a very rare situation, but the protection of the coronary arteries comes from estrogen. And therefore, Just like the Women's Health Initiative showed, these women were on Premarin, horse urine derived estrogen, 50% of which a human female have never seen, oral Premarin. The relative risk for heart attack and stroke was less for the women who were treated with Premarin than women who were untreated. So oral estrogen, it's estrogen, folks. Horse urine has estradiol in it. It has other estrogens in it. So it's the estrogen that provides the protection to the coronary arteries, to the bones, to the brain, to you name it, the vagina, the bladder. Women need estrogen your whole life. And nowadays, we know so much more, and we've got these exquisite delivery systems. This questioner also talked about injection.
Yes, she said, are oral and injectables really that bad? Let's get rid of the oral because we just talked about that. But are injections of hormones really all that bad?
Well, if injection was the only tool I had for men and women, if that was the only tool I had, men getting testosterone, women getting estrogen, I would definitely choose the injection.
Yeah.
It's not as convenient. It does this thing of you inject and you get this peak, and you don't get these nice steady levels of hormones that you get with topical estrogens. But if it was the only tool I had, I would choose injectable estrogen, even over oral estrogen. Absolutely. But this is not optimal. The
Right.
optimal is topical estrogen, topical testosterone. And I'll tell you what's really optimal is we've invented and patented a delivery system where pharmacists can dispense topical estrogen and testosterone and progesterone and DHEA in organic oils base rather than solvent base. That's a whole other story. But, there's all kinds of qualities available out there. I'd say shoot for the highest. And this is what you're shooting for. Someone who has taken on the study of treating women in menopause as something that they really love, and best case scenario, they're specializing in it.
And it shows. It does. It shows when people have that passion.
And so
Women
what I
are.
recommend that people do is go to www.menopausemethod.com.
It's up there on our group. It is indeed.
And I also recommend Carolyn made available on the Facebook page our book called Happy Healthy Hormones. And we describe in great detail what I think every woman should know. I wrote it for women because unfortunately in this day and age, to create the best programs, very often you have to know a lot. That's not the ideal way to do it. The ideal way is you go shopping and you find someone who knows a lot. And I've told this story many times. When I was when I was an intern, I had this Corvair van, and the engine needed rebuilding, and I decided to rebuild it, and I did rebuild it, and it was great fun. And by golly, that van ran after I put the whole engine. I had the whole engine totally splayed out over a garage, and I put it back together, and that engine ran, and it ran for a grand total of 9,000 miles. At which point it froze, never to move again. It became a playground fixture on a kid's preschool in Santa Fe. And then I had a Volkswagen van, and that engine needed rebuilding. And I went to a Volkswagen mechanic who rebuilt engines. That's what he did. And he let me sit in and watch him do the whole thing. And I hung out with him for 2 days while he rebuilt that engine. And I was blown away by how many hundreds of more steps that he did in the process. The man knew what he was doing. So uh, it helps to know some things, but best case,
Well,
you find someone who knows what they're doing. One of
you
the things
might.
you can do in that book could help you with is you'll now learn what an excellent method is of getting treated And sometimes if you go to your provider and you say to your provider, look, here's a copy of the book. This is the method I want. These folks will coach you into writing the prescriptions and learning. They've got a major learning and mentoring program. I've done my research. This is what appeals to me. Would you please become a provider of this? All you have to do is write a prescription. They'll help you. They'll help you even write the prescription. That's what I recommend because we feel that the fastest track to getting 3 to 4 um, professionals in each state is the women go to your friendly provider and say, look, this is state of the art. Why don't let's do this together, and it'll improve your practice and it'll improve the health of the women in your practice, and you're going to be using organic oils and it's going to be very exciting. So do it. And we think if you're willing to be part of the enrolling team, you're going to we'll train them up. We have the mechanism to do it. It's already in place. We've been training people for years. So
So
that's
I'm chomping at the bit to be able to put that out, let me tell you.
yeah.
And Jahira just said, "Where do I buy the book?" You can download it, and I'll send you the link for the ins and outs of menopause, and you can just download it. It's free. And also, Dawn said in every state like Canada, and I remember that you said something about Canada. Did you not?
We have a major team effort going to get this into Canada. My family, part of my family. I have a large family, and there's several perimenopausal women in that family right now. I knew them when they were little tykes, and one of our partners is Canadian. So we've just patented, we just uh, obtained patent pendings for the organic oils in Canada, and we've got a team going. And this is the same thing I'd recommend for someone in Canada. Go to your provider, get a paper copy of the book, which you can purchase from one of those not to be mentioned providers.
In the sky?
Yeah. And yeah, Jahira, Carolyn maybe will email you and tell you
Oh
where
no,
you
I've got this written down. I'm going to get with them. Indeed, you bet.
Canada
Um,
a lot to me, especially for my nieces. Oh my God! But Canada, I love Canada. Canada became a safe harbor for my brother, who received a draft notice in the Vietnam War, and has remained in Canada ever since. So I have a deep, deep uh, affection for Canada, and I love Canada.
my
So yeah,
mother was French Canadian.
there you go.
There you go. So I promise I will get everybody everything that they need.
Would you read Carolyn Jahira's question about topical estradiol? Do you see it?
I sure will. Topical estradiol caused me chest pain. Don't know why. So I had to stop and restart at a lower dosage.
There's always a first. I have never heard, this is the first time I've heard of topical estradiol causing chest pain.
Mm.
Never heard of it. But in medicine, you never say never. This could be the first. But I have heard, God, 30, 40 times, women in perimenopause and menopause getting chest pain and getting chest pain so severe that they thought they were having a heart attack and going to an emergency room thinking they had a heart attack and getting coronary artery catheterization to rule out that they were having a heart attack. That's how bad the chest pain was. And my own sister had this happen in the middle of the night. And it wasn't from estrogen they were taking, their estrogen was too low. And estrogen being too low is very stressful for a woman, very stressful. It leads to these phenomena called hot flashes, for example, in 75% of the women. Sometimes
Raucous.
because they're severe, sometimes they're occurring in the middle of the night. The part about a hot flash that is not commonly known is how stressful it is to a woman.
Mm.
And what it does is it triggers the biology of the fight or flight response. And the vanguard of the biology of that fight or flight response is adrenaline. And adrenaline contracts arteries for reasons, for really good reasons. So, for example, if someone's going into shock of a certain type in an emergency room, their blood pressure is falling really low, if a provider will inject adrenaline, those arteries are going to contract and that blood pressure is going to go up under certain circumstances, because adrenaline raises blood pressure. It causes arteries to constrict. And when you get a coronary artery constrict, you get chest pain royale. So the moral of that story is this: of all the women that I've heard with that story, waking up in the middle of the night with severe chest pain and heart palpitations, the 100% cause of what I'm familiar with is there was insufficient estrogen. Now,
Scary as
this
anything.
is the kind of thing, and insufficient estrogen triggers the biology of the stress response, out comes the adrenaline, you get coronary artery restriction, you get chest pain. Now, in an instance like with Jahira, if in a menopause method provider or a Sprite provider,
Sprite? Coca-Cola?
and a Bright provider, we walk down the details. That's the whole essence of individualizing individual women, because individual men, there's tremendous variation man to man about what's going on biochemically and biologically. And in individual women, there's tremendous variation in what's going on in individual women. But that's not a problem when you take the time and do what you need to do to understand the specifics of what was actually going on in Jahira. For example, we have a 12-page online questionnaire as part of the menopause method, the Bright method. And man, we learn what's going on. If we have to do some testing to further define what's going on, we do. But it sounds like you're solving the problem in a time-honored method. Jahira, you're doing what you need to do. You're following the bouncing ball, and so good on you. This is how you do it. You figure out each individual woman. I'm not saying you had chest pain from the estrogen, but I'd be more suspicious that there was a lowness that got you into the difficulty and the adrenaline thereof. But meanwhile, good on you for following the bouncing ball and starting at low dosages and gradually bringing your dosages up. But there's the angel is always in the details.
Love that saying.
And in human beings, we got so many details. So what works is to zero in, turn the microscope on to see what are the details, because these causes in most every instance are knowable.
Yes. Wow. Thank you for that very much. Um, so a woman says, and you corrected me because there's not an accent, so I didn't pronounce it correctly. I believe it's called. I am using trochase. Is
Yeah.
that the yeah? 10 estradiol, 80 estriol, and 10 estrone, which would be known as triest, if I'm not mistaken. Will I be able to get my estrogen up high enough this way so as to get the long-term health benefits that we so want?
Well, I'm not going to answer that question with a direct yes or no. Troches, not
Trochase.
not a fan,
Okay.
because when you stick a gummy or whatever, a pill underneath your tongue, some of it absorbs right into the body, because this is a mucosal surface underneath that tongue that's very absorbent.
Yeah, those two veins
But
there. Yeah.
invariably with troches, and anyone who's ever had a troche, some of it is hollow. And to me, that is not an optimal delivery system. And we've already spoken about what happens when you swallow a hormone as opposed to when it goes through the skin where it goes right into the bloodstream when it goes
Yeah.
through. And so I am not a fan of troches. I'm a fabulous fan of sublingual administration of some things. My God, nitroglycerin. There's people who have stopped themselves from getting a heart attack just by sticking a little nitroglycerin tablet underneath their tongue. It
Yeah.
absorbs tremendously rapidly, and it doesn't matter if you swallow some of it. You get that nitroglycerin in there, man. How many human beings on this walking around on this planet right now have had their life saved by nitroglycerin? So it's not that I'm not a fan of sublingual administration. It's just not for steroid hormones because you're going to swallow some of it and you have unpredictable absorption there. You're going to have variable levels depending on how much you swallow that day. So I am I'm not a fan of troches. The other thing you mentioned was trieste, and this was the original proposal by the by one of those two folks who brought bioidenticals to into medical practice, Dr. Wright. He was very well aware that women produce three different potent estrogens in their ovary at least. Estradiol, the most potent of all, estrone, which is about 80% as potent as estradiol. In fact, it's about twice or more than two times as prevalent as estradiol, estrone. And then estriol, which is about as eighth as potent, but much more prevalent. It's about eight times as it's at least 1.3 times as prevalent estriol. There's more of it than there is the sum of estrone and estradiol. Carolyn, could you mute your mic? We're getting an echo.
Sure.
Um, the so and if will people tell me if you can still hear me? I'm sure that you can. You can just put it in the chat if you can still hear me. So Dr. Wright was aware that the human ovary produced these three estrogens. So Dr. Wright's original proposal was administer these three estrogens, copy nature, and come up with a formulation that simulates what the ovary is doing. And Dr. Wright's initial suggestion was treat with trieste that contains those three estrogens. But what we learned when we did 24-hour urine hormone tests, that when we administered trieste, we did not get the metabolic profiles that we did get when we administered bieste alone, estradiol and estriol. In fact, most of the time, not all the time, if we administer a topical formulation of estrogen that's 80% estriol and 20% estradiol, and there are variations there, but that's the most common one, we're going to get a profile of metabolites and parent hormones in the urine that replicates what happens in a young, healthy menstruating woman. So Dr. Wright soon changed his suggestion from administering a trieste to administer bieste. So I'm calling out that trieste is not the optimal way to administer, but still it's going to be good. But I would never administer it in a troche. If I were to administer trieste, I would administer topically. In many ways the topicals are administered, but I'm not going to suggest it because if we were to give you trieste topically, we're going to get profiles in the 24-hour urine hormone test that differ from a young healthy woman. But if we were to give you just estradiol plus estriol, in a proper ratio, we would get a profile of hormones plus metabolites that replicated those of a young, healthy woman. So those two things I'm calling out there. But you know what? Like I said about injections, about Premarin, you're getting estrogen, and that's a good thing. So I celebrate that you found your way to estrogen, and you could take it for the rest of your life, providing your levels weren't too high, but you're not going to be able to tell unless you do 24-hour urine hormone tests. But doing troches, you're going to get some swallowing in there, so you're never going to even find out on 24-hour urine hormone test if you're in an optimal zone. We know what that optimal zone is. We know what too much and too little is. So that's my caveat there, is abandon the troches if you want to be able to be tested by 24-hour urine hormone test, which I assert is the only. I'm not talking about a 5-point urine when you're peeing on the filter paper. I'm talking about it's the 24-hour urine to date. In my opinion, my strong opinion, is the only way to be able to assess a woman that's being treated in menopause with hormones and get accurate and reproducible results. 24-hour urine hormone collection, not a urine 5-point, 24-hour urine hormone test. So you're well on your way with Troche Triest. You're well on your way. You're getting estrogen in your body. And if you don't have symptoms of estrogen overdose, such as breast tenderness, swelling, irritability, breast pain, nipple pain, if you don't have symptoms of that, you're well on your way. So don't just drop your Troche. You're getting some good stuff there. I would much prefer what you're doing than taking Premarin. Although if Premarin was the only tool I had, I would recommend Premarin. It's just that the field has advanced enormously from the 50s, 1950s, and the 80s. It's come a long way. So you're well on your way. You keep taking that stuff. Don't worry about it if you're not having symptoms of overdose. And you've got the same job that all women and all men have, is find a provider who can take you to the next step, or go to your provider who's prescribing and put them in contact with us if they would like. We can mentor them. We can give them what I would call the state of the art in the information and tools that providers need. They've made it to Troche Triest. That means they've cared about this. Your healthcare provider who prescribed this, they have some education. They have some caring about this. So they're well on their way. And maybe if they'd like, you could put them in contact with me, and we'd be happy, if they're interested, in assisting them to go to what we consider to be, in my non-humble opinion, nothing humble about it, the next stage in excellence.
I'm muting here for a second.
There you go. Thanks, Carolyn. Good.
No, thank you. I want to ask this question because it piggybacks on what you're talking about. So a woman writes in, my aunt had a hysterectomy when she was 24. She is now 73. She was a flight attendant, senior purser for Pan American Airways, which is long gone, but I mean, it's a very, high-end, classy job in the day, and loved it. And God, she was amazing. Never took a hormone in her life. Now, however, at 73, she is having horrible cognitive decline issues. Someone reached out to me because they see what we do and asked if estrogen might be something that they should discuss with their doctors. I referred them to the book, and because I'm not a doctor and I can't say, yes or no. sadly, the doctors are not really very much on board with this, and the questioner is wondering what your feeling is about a 73-year-old who had a hysterectomy at 24, had a great full life, no problems, and now is really having some problems.
I really appreciate this question. It's very relevant. This questioner is one of a multitude. Well, she's referring to her mom, did you say?
Her aunt.
Her aunt. This is a very, very common issue. Now, cognitive decline, even moving towards more severe states of dementia, and the various types of dementia there are, is extremely common in women. And the majority of women that I've interviewed over 25 years as they're in the perimenopause or early menopause. Could you mute again, Carolyn? We're getting that echo again. Thanks. They have some mild or moderate form of cognitive change. They're not thinking as clearly. It's commonly referred to in the menopause world as brain fog. And here you got women who are at the top of their professional game, or the top of their excellence and their competence in conducting their family affairs and all that they're involved in, including their community or in businesses. They're starting to have trouble thinking clearly. And there's this field of what in the heck's happening to people's brains has become quite advanced. And the state of what's known is best expressed in a book by Dr. Dale Bredesen, Bredsen or Son, Dale Bredesen. And in the title is the word Alzheimer's. Let me look at my bookshelf. I think he calls it The End of Alzheimer's. And it speaks to the complexity of someone who's having cognitive decline. Dr. Bredesen says it can be a multitude of factors. In fact, he analogizes it to a leaky roof, and that there's 36 different leak possibilities, and you got to check into finding all 36 leaks and find out how many leaks they have. But having said that, but why I'm mentioning this first is there's a complexity. There can be a complexity to cognitive decline. There can also be a non-complexity to cognitive decline in women, and it can be as elementary as insufficient estrogen. And one of the first things that happens in perimenopausal or menopausal women that we're treating with compounded bioidentical hormones is they'll say within weeks or months, "Oh my God, my brain is clear again." I had a woman yesterday who went into premature menopause in her early 30s, and her cognitive decline, she was a book lover. She used to love to read books. She had to stop reading books from her early 30s. Now she's 41. She was so grateful yesterday in a consultation we're having because she's reading books again, because her mind's cleared up. 3 months treatment. Now you have a different situation in this questioner's aunt, who she's been without estrogen for, what is that, 50 years or something like that. And the initial reflex is, and this is what I'm going to recommend, is the very first thing you try in this woman is get her on estrogen and get those levels robust and see if she clears up. However, there's this very significant caveat with this particular patient, and she's not alone. Her body has not seen estrogens for 50 years. Well, what were we talking about at the beginning of our discussion today? It's fun to be back with you, by the way, Carolyn. My God, we took a week off. What the heck? But it's fun to be back in the saddle again with you, Carolyn.
I gotta unmute. I had Dr. R withdrawal. It was awful.
This woman has been with has been without protection for her arteries, for example, among other things, for 50 years. And she's at increased risk for arterial sclerosis. So what we do in the menopause method, and in a woman like this, we would absolutely do it before we would administer estrogen to her. We would get clearance from her cardiologist, or we would order directly a stress ultrasound or a nuclear stress test, because those are the most readily practical and technical enough to assess whether this woman has a clot in a coronary artery. We need to know that, because there's some women, it's a very rare thing, it's called the window of opportunity, and there's other windows of opportunity. But if you treat a woman who hasn't seen estrogen for 10 years, that's the cutoff point, and she's got a clot in her coronary artery for 1 year only, medical literature says this woman's vulnerable for that clot breaking loose and causing a heart attack. So we're very diligent about that, and we don't confine it to 10 years without hormones. If a woman has a family history of arteriosclerosis and she's got some numbers in her blood testing that suggest that she's at increased risk, like a homocysteine elevated, a cardiac homocysteine, or a cardiac highly sensitive C-reactive protein, for example, we'll go ahead and we'll do that nuclear stress test or that stress ultrasound. If it's only been 5 years, or it's only been 3 years, it's all individualized to the individual woman. But I can tell you for sure, before I would want to treat this woman with estrogen or all 4 hormones, I would definitely want all 4 ovarian hormones, absolutely, and we would assess thyroid as well, is I'd want to know the status of her coronary arteries. And if her coronary arteries showed that she didn't have a clot in there, oh boy, would we launch on an estrogen program. And I want to discuss what that estrogen program would be. But having said that, I was reminiscing once again with Jim Herntzer, someone who's a pharmacist who's been involved in the treatment of women since the early 80s. That's, if you do the math, that's quite a few years. Because we didn't know about this possible complication until recently, he and I were reminiscing of how many women in their 80s and 90s we've treated, how many women with very significant coronary artery risks, like diabetics, for example, that we've treated, or women who had excessive weight, how many women we've treated that most likely had the metabolic syndrome and thus were at risk for coronary artery issues. But we didn't know about this particular complication, and we just went ahead and treated them, and we never, knock on wood, had a problem with a coronary. But I'm telling you what the level of detail that anyone who's treating women in menopause should know. And what I do, and we've done last year, we did 3 or 4 or 5 nuclear stress tests or echo stress tests on women that had risk factors, and this patient has risk factors. And we would start by getting clearance from a cardiologist or ordering directly a stress ultrasound or a nuclear stress test to rule out that she had a possible clot in the coronary artery. If she didn't, we'd go, now I want to address the program we would do. We would start her on all 4 ovarian hormones, because at 73, she's low on all 4 of them. None of them are normal. In fact, they're way, way low. There's no use to test her. What do we learn if we test her? Is that she's super low on all the ovarian hormones. And what we do is we start a process that we describe in Happy Healthy Hormones, is starting on low dosages, and we start very gradual with her because her body hasn't seen hormones for so long. We would do a very slow, patient, we would be patient, the patient would be patient, all of us would be patient. We start on very low dosages and gradually increase over time. How far would we go? Well, most women we treat in menopause I want to give you a pictorial showing of what we're aiming for. Young, healthy women need this much estrogen, for example. Nope, incorrect. There's a range of how much young, healthy, regularly menstruating fertile women have. Some women have a lot of estrogen, for example. I'm singling out estrogen. Some women don't have relative amount, but all of this in this range is what, because women are individuals, and that's a wide range, by the way. It's not so with no problem. We just individualize programs for each individual woman. That's not an issue whatsoever. For menopausal women, we treat at this level because that's all you need to get all the benefits without some risks with excessive estrogens for a woman who is in her 50s and older. However, there's an exception to this. And so the exception, I'm going to tell the story that I've taught many times. I was called to Washington to testify in front of the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on their bioidentical research project. And I did some research on the other panelists that were going to be on the panel with me. And there was a woman who practiced, she was a physician who practiced in Washington, D.C. area. And what I learned about her is that she was taking tremendously high levels of estrogen. Because I knew it by what she was, the protocol that she was telling me that she was on, or that she had advertised. And I was concerned about that because I knew one of the bugaboos about these committee members, because they're looking for holes in compound and bioidentical processes, was these excessive levels of estrogen that they, in their opinion, were being treated. And as she was sitting down, the coffee break was over, I was already seated. She's sitting down. She introduced herself to me. She was sitting right next to me. And I smiled at her, introduced myself, and I said, "Are you going to tell them about the method that you're using to treat yourself?" And she winked her eye at me and she said no, because she knew it was a bugaboo too, the high dosages that she was using. And she told me this story. I went out to lunch with her and her son, and she was 65. She said, at the age of 55, I started having trouble practicing medicine. I couldn't remember things about my patients. And I was staring down the barrel. I hate to use this metaphor, but I think it's very poignant. Of my mom had dementia, and my mom's sister, my aunt, had dementia. And I'm looking at that, and I'm not remembering details about my patients, which is a really challenging thing for a physician. And she reached the point where she thought, I'm not going to be able to practice medicine anymore. She's 55 years old, which is a very common age to start getting cognitive decline. So she knew about the relationship of estrogen to brain function, which is well documented in the medical literature. Oh my God, there's so many studies on this. And she said, so she started taking estrogen, and she took her initial dosages, and she started to get a little bit of clearing in her brain fog. And so she increased her dosages, and she started to get a little more clearing, and she increased her dosages, and she started getting a little more clearing. And lo and behold, she didn't know her numbers, as so few providers do understand the actual numbers. She kept on increasing the dosages, and her period came back. And ordinarily, and we discuss this in the book, this we would consider for 99% of the women in menopause an excessive amount of dosages, because it's going to stimulate breast glandular cell proliferation, and that's a whole other story. But she kept going, and she got her period back. And at the age of 65, she was still menstruating every month. And I was so moved at that lunch to hear that personal story of a physician, because we're in the same tribe. All healthcare providers I consider to be unique, from janitor to neurosurgeon. I know what these people are doing. And I have a very tremendously deep, warm space in my heart for what these people are. And I got teary, and there she was. She's cognitive as I was, absolutely, at the age of 65. And I didn't say boo about the other knowledge I had. I just celebrated it. My point is this: in rare cases, you need to really push that estrogen. And I don't hesitate to push that estrogen even if their period comes back. And yes, there's breast issues there, but we can monitor the breasts. And estrogen does not cause breast cancer. Oh, there's quite a statement. So, what is my ideal path for this woman's aunt? Is number one, find a provider that they really know what they're doing. Get that clearance around the coronary artery, possible risk. And if she's clear to go, start her on low dose of estrogen, and you keep moving up the ladder there. The medical literature supports that. When I defined this is what a young woman is, and we treat most women right below that. That's all they need to protect their vagina, bones, brain, everything that matters. There are exceptions in the medical literature. We define that optimal range. The medical literature defines it based on enough to protect the vagina and the bones. If you do that, you're getting a lot of protection all over the place. And I wish we could have based that on medical studies that included how much does it take for the brain. We know that this lower level that I was describing will protect the vagina and bones and almost everything else that a woman really wants. But that was based on what protects the vagina and the bones. That covers most everything most menopausal women does. But the medical literature is very clear that there are these exceptions of women who need much higher levels of estrogen to keep their brain functioning. So I deal with your aunt, clear those coronary arteries, and start her on, find someone who knows what they're doing, and start her on the low dosages, because you want to start low with her. Her body has not seen estrogens for 50 years. So you go low and slow because you got to gradually awaken those receptor sites. It's just an art. This takes place over time. But I would not stop increasing those estrogen levels, even if her period came back, to see if we could clear up her brain that way, prior to going to one of these functional medicine specialists who know the 36 different causes of dementia. Number one, in a menopausal woman, it's check out those estrogens. And having said this, my own mother, bless her heart, she's now passed away. She started developing cognitive decline in her 80s. And I gave her oral estrogen because she's the only patient I've ever treated with oral estrogen, but she couldn't manage the topical estrogen. And I didn't hesitate to treat her because the compromise, the risk benefits, and benefits, when you weigh the risks and benefits of losing your mind and losing mental function, you do what you need to do, even though there might be some risks. So anyway, Carolyn, oh my, a little bit over today, but what a pleasure to be back with you, Carolyn, and everyone who's tuned in here. And yeah, Tuesday and Thursday, we're back on.
Yep. The Dr. R and Carolyn ins and outs of menopause show. It's great to see you.
Great to see
Happy
you.
New Year.
Happy New Year. And of
I'll
course,
get the.
we'll be there on Thursday this week as well.
Indeed, I didn't get to a lot of my questions. We didn't get to many of these. I know I'll get the screenshots. I get them and I write them and we put them out there. And dear Dr. R answers them so beautifully. And I wish you a wonderful day. And I wish everybody a wonderful day. And we'll see you on Thursday.
Yep. Bye, everybody. See you Thursday.
Bye. Thank you.